Hello, everyone. We are back with our chats about improv. And today we have the honor and the pleasure to have Liam Brennan with us. Hello, Liam.
Hello! Yeah! How you doing?
Hey.
You alright?
Yeah. We're
You
very
too?
happy to have you with us. Yes.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me as well.
Yeah, we too. So, Liam, first of all, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us, a little bit about your improv life and where you come from and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Liam Brennan. I've been improvising now for a long time. I don't know, like 12 plus years, something like that. Um, and yeah, this is pretty much my day to day now. Like, I teach classes, do rehearsals, do shows, all that stuff. Most of my work is with it must be one of the biggest improv companies in Europe now, Hoopla Impro. We're based outside of London Bridge. And yeah, I teach classes and directing shows at the moment. Yeah, playing around with improv and what improv can look like, all that good stuff. I started back at uni. Um, I was in a short form team at university doing like Whose Line Is It Anyway style stuff. And then, but I wasn't like a big improv nerd or anything. I liked it because it was comedy, and I was doing stand up and sketch stuff at the time. And then I watched a UCB show. I think it was an ASCAT show. Just on like I think someone just like illegally ripped it on a DVD and showed it to us when we were working on our uni, and I was just like, there's sort of like long form improv, and it was amazing. It was incredible. It just went, oh my god, I want that to be my job. So and then to both healthy and unhealthy levels, obsessively tried to make that my job, and yeah, 12 years later, here I am on this show.
Yeah.
It was all for this moment.
That's perfect. Every time we talk with our guest about a certain topic, and we have two for today. The first one is how to make an improv format. Yes.
Okay. So, Liam, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I've made a lot of improv formats over the years. Some good, some pretty crappy. So I'm really obsessed with it. I love making shows, because it's just the way to form improv. I'm really interested. I think I said this like in my intro bit, but like I'm interested in what improv can look like, what the style it can be. It's sort of like I know a lot of people do like Armando's, montages, Harold's and stuff. I've just finished teaching a Harold course and it's really great fun. But it's from there for a lot of improvisers. It's like, well, what do we do now? And I think my approach, I suppose I've been thinking about this past couple of weeks to how do you make a good improv format, is one, something that the players enjoy doing and it's got a shared interest in what they do. What's really important for me is I don't really want to take this for granted. I don't think it's necessarily something that's important for all people. I don't mean that in a condescending way. It's also got to be good for the audience. Like I am very centric to, did the audience have a good time? As opposed to sometimes I think improv can be quite insular in terms of, well, we thought it was great, the choices we made because it was artistically brilliant and fantastic, but the audience didn't have a good time. So as far as I'm concerned, it needs to have both of those things. You need to serve both yourselves as players and the audience. And I think sometimes, not to be too general, but I think quite a lot of new improvisers forget one of, if not both of those things. They do stuff because that's the way we were taught to do it, as opposed to, actually, I really like this show and I think audiences will like this show as well. And I think if you tick off those two, you're in for a winner there.
Yeah.
Any performance, any artistic performance, whether it's improvisation, dance, theater, cinema, whatever it is, ultimately is to be exposed to an audience that will be sympathetic to the performers, and to communicate the feelings to the audience. Otherwise, it's just no point. Sorry, Johan, you were going to say something.
You said one of the most very important thing is that the audience they have a good time. How is that possible through a format?
So I think going to be really careful about what I say here, but I don't think certain improv formats are designed with audience in mind. I think they are designed for educational purposes, let's say. What do I want to say? So, for example, if you have an opening to your show, there is a monologue opening. I see why that's done quite often. And actually, if the monologues are brilliant, it works really well. Quite often, they're not that brilliant, and it's sort of this. The show will start off with a bunch of monologues, and then scenes will follow. And is that for the benefit of the players? I guess it kind of is, because that's the role of an opening, is to generate lots of ideas.
Yeah.
Or is it for the audience? Does the audience make that connection between those two things? Or is it, I've seen, like, I think I went to like a Harold performance, and the audience, I think, really enjoyed it, but they were kind of at the end kind of scratching their head a little bit as to what they'd just seen. Not to get too much into what I'm going to talk about a bit later, but it's like that's kind of what I mean by designing it for the audience. Ostentatious, for example, is really successful UK improv team that does improvise Jane Austen, and I feel like that's very much got the audience in mind. That's not to say that all improv shows should sort of look at what's a popular franchise, or I think Jane Austen as franchise isn't quite right, but I think you understand my meaning there, and then make an improvised version of that, which you do see during the Fringe. But it is also connecting to an audience. An audience will look at that and go, great, yeah, I want to see that. I want to see an improvised Jane Austen. I want to see an improvised horror movie, for example. It's keeping the audience in mind, I suppose, as opposed to be quite distancing with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happens also, for example, in music. When I was studying music, I went to do the other degree, blah blah blah, and then you end up with the contemporary composers, which are composing in 12th tone, and it just becomes very mathematical, very theoretical, very academic. But at the end of the day, as an audience, it's not moving you, and this is the main thing for the arts, music, improv, whatever it is to move your audience. So yeah, totally agree.
Are there specific things you can do in a format to trigger that connection with the audience, so that the audience cares about it? Because I think when the audience cares and they care what they see and they enjoy seeing it, they want to see more. They are connected with the show, and they probably might like it. I can imagine that someone does a fantastic monologue and everyone thinks, "Oh my God! I mean, this is so good." Yeah, but and that's up to the individual players to make that happen and to make the audience care. But can you also trigger that through specific format decisions, you think?
Yeah, I think it's like thinking about, for example, in a couple of months or thereabouts, I'm going to be directing an improvised action movie, for example. So in the design of that format, I need to be thinking in terms of what does theatre do well and what does it not do so well, right? Like, for example, action movies, we audiences generally love action movies because of the fighting scenes contained within, or the action scenes, I suppose, more specifically. Can stage do that well when it's improvised? Probably not. You can have like little moments, and you can sort of have little spots and little bits. But actually, what's quite fun, I did an exercise on this the other day, but you can do these really lovely emotional moments while action is happening in the background.
Okay.
Say you and I were having a gun battle, and we sort of have that kind of going in the background of each of the scenes, while we also talk about actually how we grew up together. And even though you've become this evil mortal nemesis of
Yes.
mine, but it was all caused by that time I kicked sand in your face in kindergarten, for example. So I think that is stuff that can be baked into the format. Not so much that it becomes, to Maggie's point, prescriptive, but it sort of gives the players options to play with, and also, again, highlighting the strengths. And I think improv and theatre does relationships really well. That's how theatre works, essentially. Action stuff is really hard to pull off. So that's kind of got to be in the background versus the relationships, which need to be in the foreground to hold the piece together, essentially. I suppose there's a difference there. Like one of the best things I've ever made, humility aside, was last year. I did a show called WrestleProv, and it was essentially me and one of my best mates had a wrestling match, and another one of our wrestling friends refereed, and it was great fun because we sort of the way to get that connection in, it is baked into that show, because we wanted the audience shouting out, calling out,
yes,
booing me as the baddie, cheering Mandeep as the good guy, and we got like a suggestion of what we were feuding over, what our conflict was, to use I suppose more improv terminology. And that was really fun. I think that really worked well as a format. Probably one we wouldn't do a tremendous amount of times, because we're not, because I'm just going to injure myself if I do that show too many times. But it is looking at what have we got here, our strengths and weaknesses. We're good at sort of doing these big over the top characters. It's a really nice way of letting the audience in and sort of connecting with them. I think very few people in the audience have ever really seen wrestling beyond in the boom period of the 90s, but because actually it's the goodie versus baddie,
yes,
really easy to follow, we can connect with the audience. And it wasn't complicated. It might have looked complicated at the outset, but we made it as easy as possible for ourselves. And it's a slight off thing, but I quite often see people make it as complicated as possible. I don't quite know why. Maybe it's kind of like, oh, the more complicated it is, the better the format is. And actually, I've been part of formats before where I've been a guest performer, and they went, so you do this, and then you do this, and then and it's like, oh my god, like I don't know what to do. I'm kind of just gonna go out there and do my best, you know, as opposed to actually it's really simple. You're the goodie, you're the baddie.
What do you think about the distinction about, say, in a long form, having lots of structures and formats, and you already mentioned a little bit about that, and doing it very organically?
I don't think it matters too much. I think it's all in the packaging. I think, does it work for the players, and is it entertaining for the audience? Like, for example, been working on using a movie trailer as an opening recently, and that's really fun. Like, that's a fun opening because we get a title from the audience, and then it's 2 minutes of the in a world where, and then you just have all these like little cut bits and stuff. So in a sense, we're kind of playing with premise. We're playing with generating lots of ideas at the top that we bring into our improv scenes later on. So in theory, I quite like it. And actually, with all this in mind, I quite like working with premise. But I think that's something that's because I'm quite a heady improviser. I've sort of had to train myself away from it to sort of broaden out a little bit. So I don't necessarily think one's better than the other. That's not just me being being diplomatic. I think it's, does it work for you as a performer? I see lots of performers that do organic that are like terrified. I see lots of people that do premise and like pulling from an opening, and lots of pulls that just don't have the head for it. And it's like, well, let's make something that fits you and does it work for your audience as well? Are the audience going to enjoy it? I really want to do a course on it at some point. So I'm sort of in the back of my mind of kind of designing and it in the back of my head. But one day, it's not there. It's not out yet. It's not out yet. But one day.
How would you call the course?
I don't know. It's interesting doing marketing to improvisers.
It's part of reaching your audience. You have to market it with a title or a name or something. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like even small things. Like I've talked to you about this before, Maggie, about like people like it when there's a show attached to a course. I mean, that would be kind of obvious with a design your own format course, but it's stuff like that. It's sort of like, what's the outcome that an improviser wants to get? I think the ability to make your own show, maybe that is what it's called, make your own show. So it kind of says what it is, but it's also quite enticing. I think like, I don't know, 10 years ago, I would have been really up for a course. I think.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just normal. For example, again, as a musician, well, you could have fun just getting together with your mates and having and playing a jam. But if you really want to go any further, you can get tired just being rehearsing and never having an opportunity to have a show in front of an audience and see how the audience is going to take your music, you know. And also, it's not just about how the audience is going to take your music, but how the audience is going to give you back that energy, that feedback that keeps you going, you know.
I think you gotta get like I used to suffer from terrible stage fright. I don't have it anymore. I get very maybe a little bit nervous before shows, but that's quite rare. I do not miss that, but I think it is useful to be in front of an audience just to get used to what it feels like being in front of an audience, because people are super clever in the room, doing all these brilliant characters, super committing, doing these really great emotional offers that we can build the comedy on. And then they get in front of an audience and they cack their pants. They talk really fast, completely don't listen to each other, which is totally like I do that as well. I get in front of an audience and my ego goes, "Oh, I hope these people love me by the end of this." So it's totally normal. It's just getting coming to terms with that relationship and also controlling that relationship a little bit, so it's not just people joke, and you become an absolute nightmare to perform with, which I'm sure I have been.
But the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and also the audience. If the audience laughs, then you know that what you're doing, what's your strong point. And if they don't laugh, you think, oh no, this is not my strong point, because they react to it, you know. So it does teach you a lot. Being in front of an audience and how they react.
It's a really interesting one. I talk quite often in my beginners classes to like, for example, let's say Maggie and I start a scene and Maggie comes out as an astronaut and just, and I come out and go, "Bill, stop pissing around and help me with the wall." Like completely, okay, you're going to get a massive laugh in front of the audience, and then a newer player will go, "Keep doing that thing, keep destroying the reality of the scene." So there's a nuance to it, right? It's not just laughs mean good, keep doing the thing, but you definitely want to hear that audience. What does the audience like? It's the audience is almost like what's that I always think like a Geiger counter or something like that. It's kind of it sort of gives you an idea of what the atmosphere is. It might not be yeah, thermometer is a really lovely way of thinking of it. It sort of gives you like how much the audience is engaging comedically at this moment in time, but it doesn't necessarily give you that chart of the scene.
Okay, but for example, going back to that just example that you just mentioned, you know, going back and also going back to the format. When you start the improv, the first thing you've been told is the yes and if you don't yes and, that's wrong. And the example that you just gave us is funny and it's not doing the yes and it's destroying it. So how much is the formula, you know, the format that we've been told going to be useful for the rest of our improv career? You know?
I think this might sound like a really obvious question, but what's the point in an improv format? Well, I think it gives the audience a picture of what your show's going to be. In a really superficial way, it means this is, you know what the poster's going to look like.
Yeah.
You know, people know what they're getting in for. You kind of know the shape of the show. But I think, you know, the format's job really is to prop you up. Your job isn't to prop the format up. Like you have this with Harold, for example. It's sort of like the one of the oldest improv formats there is, if not the oldest, really. And it's sort of sometimes there is a tying down to this is what the format should look like at the expense of the improvisers, if it's coming at the expense of the improvisers. And this isn't necessarily just the Harold, by the way. This is every format out there that people sort of go, this is the way we do the format. But why? If you do the format in a way that makes shitty improv, you probably shouldn't be doing the format, or the format should be there to benefit you, not the other way around. We're not trying to create museum pieces. We're trying to create improv, like entertainment for people. So I think that's the distinction I make as well. Is when is this stuff useful? I think it helps prop up the performers and gives structure to the chaos that is often an improv performance.
Yeah. So in other words, the limit between being organic and following the format is just like this. It's not a strict wall.
Yeah, exactly, because otherwise you're just doing the same stuff over and over, literally the same stuff over and over and over again, and it's just boring. People like improv because that it doesn't all have to be organic. I don't necessarily want to see a show where everything's okay, because it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily make for a very good show. I sort of want a bit of direction, but not so much that I know what the end point's going to be, or you know.
Okay, Liam. So, is there anything else you want to add to this subject, the format?
No, not really. I think it's just the summation. I think a lot of newer groups could do with just thinking, is this fun to do? And will an audience enjoy watching this?
Yeah.
And I think actually a lot of the time people don't think that. They get really complicated, think what they should be doing, what the teacher taught them, as opposed to, do I like doing this? Is this fun to watch? I say that's, if you didn't pay any attention to anything that I said, and you listen to that bit, you've passed as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Okay, Liam. Well, thank you very much for being with us for the first part of the show. And we will be back very soon with Liam Brennan.
Bye.